رحم الله من قرأ سورة المبارك الفاتحة مع الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من اللعين الغوي الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على خيرة خلق الله أجمعين وهو أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين وهو أبو القاسم المصطفى محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الميامين المهديين المظلومين ولعنة الله دائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من يومنا هذا إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي ورضيت لكم الإسلام دينا. I begin in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal and convey my tabrikat to all of you on this beautiful occasion that we gather to remember the Imam of our time. The subject that I've chosen for today is or revolves around the notion of what does it mean that the earth would not exist without the Imam? That we often hear this. لولا الحجة لساخت الأرض على أهلها. That if there isn't the proof of God, the earth would collapse on its people. And what does this mean, particularly at a time when we cannot see the Imam? Or at least most of us cannot see the Imam. And even though we can't see him, how do we know he exists? Does he have some kind of method? Is he working in the background? What is going on while we cannot see the Imam? Salamullahi alayhi. And then secondly, during this period, what does he expect of us? There are two things that he outlines, or rather three things that the Imam outlines, salamullahi alayhi, in his letters that are narrated in the works such as Kamaluddin of Sheikh Saduq or the Ghaiba, Kitab al-Ghaiba of Sheikh Tusi. Number one, the Imam Salamullahi alayhi, when writing to the community that were arguing or disputing about his existence, he tells the community that do you not have the knowledge of the authentic traditions that have come to you regarding the succession of the Imam? So this is very important. There is a prerequisite knowledge that every Shia must have. He says that, are you not aware that there will be 12 leaders after the Prophet? There will be 12 nujum, or he says, na'al bi na'al, na'al bi na'al. It's a beautiful statement. The Imam says that it'll be like one foot slipping into the slipper or the sandal of another. That it's seamless, the move from one to the next until the 12th Imam. And each one is like a star, a najm, that guides the earth. This is the kalam of Sahib al-Zaman in his letters. And one of the great blessings is that within 100 years, or not even 100 years, of these letters being written, or somewhat, within a century, I would say, or so, these letters were preserved. Known as, the genre of literature is known as al-Tuqiyat. Tuqiyat Sahib al-Zaman. letters or the prescriptions or the communique or the telegrams, so to speak, the written telegrams of the Imam of the time. And he would often, questions would come to him and he would communicate with his representatives. He would even communicate with representatives as far off as Azerbaijan. Right? He had a representative by the name of Qasim bin A'la, who was a great companion of the Imam and also a Sheikh of Al-Kulaini, the compiler of Al-Kafi in Azerbaijan. So the Shia hadith, and interestingly, until today, Azerbaijan or the Azeri Turks are one of the important and earliest and most ancient societies of Shiism, of the followers of the Aimma, is from Azerbaijan. I don't know how many people know that. The Azeris. This goes back to the time of Sahib al-Zaman himself. He had special representatives, or at least one special representative in Azerbaijan. So important point is Aqidah, having correct belief. The second important point that the Imam mentions, Salamullahi alayhi, in a letter to the early community is to remember alayna al-isdar wa minna al-isal, that with us is the origins and from us comes communication, meaning return, raddu al-amr ilayna, the Imam says, return your affair to us, do recourse to us. When you're in a state of confusion, when you're in a state of seeking guidance, ask yourself if that guidance has the Imam's involvement in it. And then he says, فَلَا يَدَّعُوا عَنْهُمْ اتِّبَاعَ الْهَوَى. And our Shia are invited and urged to not follow their base desires. Why? لِيُقِيمُوا عَلَى أَسْلِهِمْ الَّذِي كَانُوا عَلَيْهِ, so that the Shia will remain on their origins, on the path that Allah and the Imam has chosen for them, so that they will not swerve. They stay on their asl. They stay on the path that Allah and His Messenger has chosen for them. So there are three important messages. One message is to have knowledge of the imamah, of the wilayah, to take the knowledge of the aqidah and the belief seriously. And number two is to abstain from those things that we know deep down is counterproductive or, God forbid, destructive to our iman and our faith. And number three, this is done so that we remain لِيُقِيمُوا عَلَى أَسْلِهِمْ الَّذِي كَانُوا عَلَيْهِ, so that they may remain on their origins, on their asl, which is pure. This is a particular communication for the Shia of Ahlul Bayt and the Shia of Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. And thus we read in Ziyarat Ali Yasin, which I highly, highly, highly recommend to all of you to read. It is among the most authentic and important ways of communicating with the Imam of the time. When he was asked, well, if we wish to turn to you, how do we turn to you? And you begin by saying, As-salamun ala Ali Yasin, right? Salamun ala Ali Yasin, that peace be upon all the family of Yasin, right? Ahlul Bayt are known as Ali Yasin. And in this dua / ziyarah, it's kind of a mixture of both. What does the Imam say? Right? And this ziyarah, interesting, is narrated by Abdullah bin Ja'far Himyari. Right? Himyari was another very important conduit between the Imam and the people. So in addition to the four that the brother mentioned, there were other people like Abdullah bin Ja'far Himyari. The very important person who's narrating this ziyarah or tawajjuh that the Imam recommends. It's found in the Mazar of Ibn Mashhadi and others. I've written alhamdulillah, extensively on this subject during my doctoral dissertation. In this, Sahib al-Zaman says, قَدْ شَقِيَ مَنْ خَالَفَكُمْ, that miserable is the one who opposes you, meaning the Imams. وَسَعِدَ مَنْ أَطَاعَكُمْ, and happy and successful is the one who obeys you. That ultimate happiness, ultimate serenity versus ultimate misery and depression and sadness and loss are counterposed to one another. On one hand is the Imam's opposition, or opposition to the Imam. On the other hand is obedience to the Imam. And when we try to live a life of obedience to the Imam, we'll begin to discover the hidden hand of his in our life. Mark my words, you will discover in different ways and at different times how the Imam guides you in your daily life. Because what I'm now going to move to is the fact that everything works in this universe, yajri bil asbab. Everything works in this universe by cause and effect. It has a sabab behind it. And the Imam is working constantly behind the scenes. And we have different references to these things from time to time in the Imam's own letters, demonstrating in some mysterious and very subtle way the Imam has his own method of operating during the occultation, even before the dhuhr. But this is hidden and khafi, it's subtle. And it is there without us realizing it or understanding it entirely. For example, the great scholars and Maraja, they write about this in their book that, okay, Imam is in ghaibah, so what is his use? We can't see him. We can't communicate directly with him. So what's the point? And the answer to that question is every positive aspect of Islam today, every person that finds Islam today and the correct path of Islam has done so because of the guidance of Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman. Because of the tabligh and the da'wah that continues in a subtle and a khafi way, in a subtle way. For example, after September 11th, most of you in this room may not have even been born. 9/11, leave aside, or maybe you were born but you don't even remember, you're very young. On September 11th, there was a huge attack on the United States. Thousands of people died. The Muslim community in the West was under tremendous pressure. Tremendous pressure. Yet out of 9/11, more people found Islam than before 9/11. How is this possible? You know, Ayatollah al-Udama Sheikh Muhammad al-Sanad al-Bahraini in Najaf al-Ashraf has written an amazing book about some of these ideas. And he says it is without a doubt that when we see incredible events in the midst of profound tragedy, in the midst of profound terror, in the midst of profound loss, yet Islam and people towards Tashayyu grows, this is no doubt, we believe, he says, the work of the Imam of the time. Or thousands of people finding Islam and even Tashayyu, or Shiism, or the path of Ahlul Bayt in prisons. How is that even working? People discovering Islam while in prison, coming in as a murderer or as a thief or whatever it is that they went to prison for, and leaving as a mu'min or a mu'minah. All of this, we believe, in one way or another, comes down to the jihads or the preparations that the Imam has put in place during the lesser occultation, so that the da'wah and the kalima of La ilaha illallah will continue to spread. Another very simple manifestation of this is the survival of this religion. Through so many conquests, through so many wars, despite so much oppression, the murder of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Shia, even at the time of the Mamluk Empire under Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, and during this time, going forward until today, yet Tashayyu, or the path of Madhab Ahlul Bayt, has never been stronger. Do we think that it's because we deserve it? This is what Sheikh Sanad asks. Damadillah, may Allah give him hafidullah, may Allah protect him, one of our Maraj in the city of Najaf. He says, no. If we look with the eye of insight to try to understand how this deen has survived, how the madhab of Ahlul Bayt has survived. Min qurun ila qurun, from centuries to centuries. Min jilin ila jil, from period to period of great strife and tragedy, yet the kalam of Ahlul Bayt is known more than it has ever been known before today. How? The fall of Baghdad, the exilement of Sheikh Tusi from Baghdad to southern Iraq, the burning of the libraries. And on and on and on, all these events in history. Ayatollah Sistani, may Allah give him a long life and protect him under the shadow of protection of Allah Azza wa Jal. He says something very important, my dear brothers and my dear sisters, and I would like you to pay heed to this point that Samahat al-Sayyid al-Marja al-A'la, Ayatollah Sistani, mentions. He says that the secret to the survival of the madhab of Ahlul Bayt is al-Hawza al-Miya wal-Marja'iyya, is the existence of the Hawza, of the Islamic seminary, and its leadership, which is al-Marja'iyya al-Ulya, the highest religious authorities. How? And yet until today, our Maraja are not subservient to any third power or second power. They maintain complete independence. This is a miracle in itself. I remember I was in a gathering where I think I was the only Shia academic. It was an academic gathering of professors from around North America. We were gathered in Washington, D.C., or just outside of D.C. in Hendon, Virginia. And one day the question of religious authority came up. And we were there with some very prominent Sunni ulama. One of them was, I think, the head of the Fiqh and Fatawa Council of North America, a Sudanese scholar. And he turned to us and he says, Wallah, ahna fi fawda. We are in a state of chaos, meaning the non-Shia community. And why? Because it's Baghdadi and this person and this person. Everyone is claiming religious leadership. Left and right, and bombing, and 9/11, and this and that, and suicide bombing, and blah, 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 on and on and on. Kada wa kada. Chaos after chaos. We're dealing with one crazy event after another, and each person is claiming authority over the community. Each person is claiming to be a mufti. Each person is claiming to be a religious leader. Of course, it's not representative of Islam, certainly. And he turned to me and others and he says, at least the Shia have marja'iyah. That they are, to a certain extent, to a great extent, saved from this chaos, from this fawda, from this fitna, from this fasad. Is this not the guidance of Sahib al-Zaman? Absolutely it is, and I'll tell you why. Because Sheikh al-Mufid and Sharif al-Murtada, Alam al-Huda, These were the great scholars of the early period. Just after the occultation, they began compiling hadith, books on theology, around the year in the early 400s of Hijrah. They both write. Al-Murtada writes in Al-Mughni'a. Mufid writes in his Al-Fusul al-Ashra fil Ghaiba, which I'm currently finishing a translation and a new edition for the Shia Research Institute. Inshallah, in 2023, the book will come out on the occultation of the Imam, as presented by Sheikh al-Mufid. Both of them mention something very powerful and very interesting. And Sharif al-Murtada, Alam al-Huda, was of course Naqib Talibiyin of the time, of all the Alawiyin, the Sadat. He was the head of all the Sadat. That's a huge position, can you imagine? In those days, he used to have a position called Naqib Talibiyin, of all the descendants of Ali ibn Abi Talib, were known as Alawiyin, right? They're the Alawi. Right? In Iraqi, we say, if it's a lady, we say Alwiya. You know, like she's a Sayyida, they say Alwiya. So he was an alim and a person of very high respect in the Muslim community. He was appointed by the Khalifa of that time to take care of all the affairs of the Sadat, that basically to be, the representative of the Sadat, of the descendants of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He writes in his book, Al-Mughni'a fil Ghaiba. And before that, Al-Mufid, his teacher, writes that it is not possible that the Imam would go into occultation without there being some kind of succession plan. Very important, because they were very close to the period of the Ghaiba, right? Mufid was a student of Saduq. Saduq's father was from the time of the early part of the occultation. And he says, both of them they do ishara to this. They're very careful in how they write about this. But they basically say, and as does Karajiki in Kanzul Fawaid. I know I'm dropping a lot of names here, but these are important people. Abu Fath al-Karajiki, Sharif al-Murtada, Sheikh al-Mufid, Muhammad bin Muhammad Nu'man al-Mufid. All three of them, right, in Kanzul Fawaid, in Fusul al-Ashra, and Al-Mughni'a. These are some of the most important works on the Ghaiba. Unfortunately, our community is not that accessible. They maybe know or they don't know about how this literature written in a very early period about the occultation. But all of them say it is impossible. It is not possible. It is ma'roof indana. It is known to us that yes, the Imam went into occultation, but that does not mean that he is no longer active. It does not mean that he no longer has operations. There was a common understanding among the Maraja of those days. You would say, they didn't call them Maraja, they were Fuqaha of those days, the jurists of those days, the great Muhaddithin of these days, the narrators of Hadith in those days, and theologians, that there was a subtle relationship between the Imam and the Shia. And this link would never be severed. It cannot be severed, because the earth would collapse on itself. Meaning it's not just the fact that the Imam exists as a person, so the earth exists. Yes. But the earth exists because the Imam ensures that the kalima of La ilaha illallah will continue to grow. Until it reaches a point that the community is ready for his dhuhur. And the situation is ready in the eyes of Allah, in the decision of Allah, for the Imam to return in his physical appearance. Thus, even the existence of food on our plates, Sheikh Sanad goes on to explain this, even our food that we eat, the farming, how is it that despite the fact that the earth has grown and multiplied, the population has exponentially multiplied. We're now what, 8 billion? Was it like 8 billion, I think, right? Yet did you know now the technology that we have will be sufficient to feed the entire earth? The technology exists, right? Through vertical farming and so on and so forth, and technology and all that. But yet how has the earth grown so fast, the population of the earth, Yet there is enough resources to feed the people of the earth. Now, whether they're equitably distributed, that's a different issue. That's people's problem. Again, this comes down to the Imam's existence, the Imam's operations. For example, Imam al-Kadhim, did you know that he spent perhaps, I don't remember how many years now, but at least a decade or so of his life, or more, I don't have the exact numbers now, in prison. How many people were able to access him from in Basra or in Baghdad when the Imam was in a dungeon or in a prison? Very few people. Yet how did the Shia community survive during his imamat? Think about it. Allah Azza wa Jal provides a way, and we're going to talk about how that is in a moment now. I'm going to address that and conclude with that. How did Imam al-Kadhim from a prison, how was he able to still oversee all the affairs of his community? What is really the difference? Okay, maybe some very limited people could see him in prison. We have one example of that, of a person by the name of Abu Imran. I don't remember his full name. Abu Imran, Ibrahim al-Imran, something like that is his name. I don't remember the full name. But he was one of the few people that could visit the Imam while he was in prison and recorded his ahadith. And we actually found a book of this in the 1960s in Damascus, the recorded ahadith of the 7th Imam, which was actually preserved by the Sunnis. The notes from their class sessions with the 7th Imam in Baghdad. And I translated it recently into English. It was my teacher, Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Hussein Jalali, who found it in the 1960s. He's now passed away, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. But the point is that how did Imam al-Kadhim continue to run the community? Think about it, mu'mineen. Allah gives a way. It is not impossible. Because the Imam is not us. The entire creation is under the influence of the Imam. Whether it be during the ghaibah or the dhuhr, there's no difference. The entire creation of Allah is under the influence of the Imam. This is how Allah has created the universe. And this Imam is described by Rasulullah as قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله المهدي طاووس أهل الجنة طاووس أهل الجنة, that the Mahdi is the peacock of paradise. Subhanallah. The peacock of paradise. That his beauty will radiate everywhere like a peacock's feathers when it spreads out. Right? The peacock is the most beautiful bird, isn't it? Right? When its feathers are spread out. It's just generally a very beautiful, magnificent bird. But that peacock, which is just, the Mahdi is described as a peacock by Rasulullah. The beauty can be found now. This is the point. That if we look deep into our life and ask ourselves, how am I a Shia? How am I still on the path of wilayah? How have I woken up today and still believed in the 12 Imams? That is because Allah's hujjah has guided me to that. That is the reason. And how does he do it? Simple. I don't have time to go into the riwayah, but there's a beautiful riwayah in Kamaluddin wa Tamamu Ni'mah of Sheikh Saduq, one of the most important books written on the occultation of the 12th Imam, written by Sheikh Saduq, who was born by the dua of the Imam, right? His father sent a letter to the Imam. Anyway, it's a long story. His father received a letter from the 12th Imam, and he was born of that dua. In this very lengthy hadith, the Prophet is in a discussion with Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he says that when the angels bowed to Adam, in reality, he says, وَأَوْدَعْنَا صُلْبَهُ وَأَمَرَ الْمَلَائِكَةِ بِسُجُودِ لَهُ تَعْظِيمًا لَنَا وَإِكْرَامًا. He says that when the angels bowed to Adam, in sajda rather, prostrated, they were prostrating in reality to what was contained within Adam, which was the potential existence of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. And they did sujood. Sujood meaning taskhir, meaning that they were in a state of obedience, of control. Of course, Muhammad wa ali Muhammad are a'la and a'zam and afdal to the malaika. They're greater than the angels. And when the angels did prostration to Adam, that was a sign of their obedience to Adam. That was a sign that Allah has put the angels at the disposal of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thus, the Imam of the time has the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at his disposal to perform whatever it is that needs to be performed in a subtle way without us being able to see it or necessarily understand it. But it exists, and this is our aqidah of Imamiyah. This is our belief as Shia. This is not some weird theory or something. This is our belief as Shia. And it is important for us to believe in this as we try to get closer to the Imam by obeying him, by loving him, by reciting Ali Yasin, by staying away from those desires that are in contradiction to the guidance of the Imam. And when we do this, you will begin to notice the imprint of his divine guidance in your life, and inshallah, I will not see it in my life as well. You will. And you'll develop this closeness. And when you say, As-salamun ala Ali Yasin, Salamun ala Ali Yasin, you feel that he's with you. When you say, Ya Sahibul Zaman, you feel that he is with you. Because you know that he's living. We know that he's present. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inshallah give us a tawfiq to have that connection. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
So we do have some questions here, Sheikh, from our audience here. Sure. So the first set of questions, it's two questions into one. So the question is, were the representatives of the Imam appointed to different geographical areas? And secondly, how did the Imam ensure that his communication reached to people further away?
So that's a good question. Well, the four special representatives of the Imam were located in Baghdad, because Baghdad was the capital city of the Islamic Empire at that time. It was both the intellectual and cultural capital of the Islamic, at least of the Western Islamic Empire at the time. The Eastern Islamic Empire would have different locations, but the Western Islamic Empire, certainly the western side, was Baghdad. However, what Sheikh al-Mufid and the early scholars tell us, and ahadith tell us, is the Imam had representatives in other parts. Azerbaijan being a... Can anyone tell me where Azerbaijan is, first of all? I mean, I'm dropping names of countries, but how many people, if they look on a map, can maybe find it? I mean, I don't expect you to. It's not that well known. Where is Azerbaijan, sister? Between Iran and Turkey. Yeah, north of Iran, exactly. It's a Turkic place, Azerbaijan, right? So there was a significant Shia population there, in Yemen as well, and in other parts. We have evidence that the letters of the Imam would reach there. How he would send them, maybe by bird, by horsemen. We have evidence that the Imam had couriers that he would use, different couriers that would deliver certain important things from his office, from wherever he was in the world at the time. Often it would be, yes, through the intermediary of the four representatives, like Uthman bin Sa'id, Muhammad bin Uthman, or a Samari, right? So the Imam would continue communicating with his general representatives in different parts of the Muslim world. And they also had a very complex financial network of how they would move finances and money around, because the dues would be due to the imam. So we have examples of how people would send money from Maru, which is a province of Iran, all the way to Baghdad, right? So they also set up a quite nuanced financial system at that time. And when the imam went into greater occultation, the community was prepared. At least the ulama were prepared for that situation. I believe that they were prepared, because you can tell in the way Mufid, Murtada, and Karajiki write about the occultation, that it was in such a way that they were prepared to take on this position of riyasat and leadership of the Muslim community. Right? Often the thesis is that the Muslim community was just dropped into complete hayra. Yes, it is known as Zamanu Hayra, or the period of confusion to a certain extent. But that is not entirely the case. Because if that was truly the case, then we wouldn't see, I think, that certainty on the part of the scholars that came just less than a century after, in their confidence in how to deal with some of these issues. And so you can almost see the early scholars as being successors of the general representatives or the special representatives of the imam. In a very general sense, though, right? Not that they had kind of political authority, no, but that system existed, and that's how the madhab continued.
If we can specifically, next question is if we can specifically talk about Prophet Isa alayhi salam, specifically about what proof is that he will be coming back, and secondly, what will he be doing when he comes back in regards to his role as to the 12th Imam?
Prophet Isa alayhi salam, this is just based on riwayah, right? It's based on hadith. There's no evidence in the Quran, direct ayah in the Quran that says that he will return with the Mahdi. It's not an ayah of Quran. It's based on riwayah, hadith, of both Sunnah and Shia, that there will be a second coming of Jesus, right? So, I mean, Christians believe in a second coming. We believe in a second coming as well. And that he will essentially be the lieutenant of the Imam. He will serve the Imam as his lieutenant and as his servant. And that's one of the most important positions. So I assume he would have some place in his army, some place in preaching. Because the Imam, the riwayat say, Jama'a nas ala tawhidi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the Imam will unite people on the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On kalima of la ilaha illallah will be what will unite all of humanity. All of humanity will be united on the belief that there is no God but God. So, Nabi Isa alayhi salam will be instrumental in executing the da'wah of the Imam of the time, inshallah.
Inshallah, thank you. You spoke about Aqidah in your lecture. So if you can kind of enlighten us on how did the grand jurists continue on the legacy of the Ahlul Bayt and making sure that Aqidah is maintained? And secondly, how did they handle different social circumstances and occurrence during the ghaibah of the Imam?
So number one, they had the riwayat of the Aimma, they had the ahadith of the Imams and the legal precedents that were set by them in writing. So we know that during the time of the Imams, there were hundreds of books or pamphlets that were compiled and written by the students of the Imams, like Muhammad bin Muslim and Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman and Al-Fadl ibn Sha'ban, and so many others, right? The Tayalisi and so on and so forth. So there was an existing genre of literature known as kutub or usul, which were lecture notes or parchments, written on parchment or written on basically notebooks, written by various companions of the Imams that contained their legal rulings. So for example, companions of the Imams would write books such as Kitabu Salah, Kitabu Siyam, Kitabul Hajj, the book about Hajj, the book about Salah, the book about fasting, the book of Ziyar, Kitab Dua, Kitab Amal al-Yawm wal-Layla. We have these books about the Amal, for example, of the month of Ramadan. The companions of the Imams compiled this in their lessons with the Imam. And we have so much evidence to this, of this effect. And I write about this in the first 120 pages of my dissertation, which inshallah will come as a book on the history and philosophy of Dua and Ziyarat. About these books and their existence. And in the last three of the 5 appendices deal with this as well, basically listing what these books are and who wrote them. So the early community of fuqaha, or of scholars, shall we say, the scholarly class inherited a very archaic, early and antique tradition, written tradition, from the time of the Imams. And we find evidence of this in books like the Fihris of Sheikh Tusi, right, which is his index of books in these different bibliographical works, whether it be in the Rijal of Najashi, Fihris of Tusi, the Fihris of Ibn Qulaway, the Fihris of Saduq or Saduq's father. I don't want to go into a whole discussion of Ilm al-Hadith. But so the fuqaha inherited this tradition. So they already had sources to work with. Now, as far as adapting to new social situations, they would have to, at times, do their best on the basis of information that is in front of them, with the niyyah of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obedience to the Imam. They would have to do their best. And that's what matters. They would do their best with the information that is in front of them, with the principles and the various objectives of Islam and Iman, and what they've understood from the seerah and the biography of the Prophet and the Imams and the ayat of Quran, to come up with a solution for things. And that's on the basis of their exertion, of their best effort. Is that infallible? No. It's not infallible. But Allah doesn't expect it to be infallible. But what matters is that it's based upon the precedent of the Quran and the Sunnah. And then they would develop a very complex, rational, and intellectual edifice by which to interpret this philologically, historically, philologically meaning the science of language, develop the science of, the science of language was already developed during the time of the Imams, but they would be inheriting this. So they would essentially become interpreters of the tradition. Both inheritors and interpreters of the tradition.
Jazakallah. Does the Imam know the exact date of his return, or is that knowledge only revealed to him when Allah wills? And secondly, can you please explain the connection between Masjid al-Sahla and our 12th Imam's return, and why specifically Masjid al-Sahla?
So first of all, only Allah knows the time that the Imam will come back. Right? As the Imam says himself, that the coming of the Imam is among the aqdar al-ilahiyya, right? That among the things that Allah has determined. So Allah, al-alam, Allah is the most knowledgeable, and Allah knows the exact moment that the Imam will have his public announcement, right? Where he will publicly come in the city of Makkah. He will appear in the city of Makkah, right? Where the community will see him in the city of Makkah, right? Interestingly, in the city of Makkah, not in Kufa. Then he will go to Kufa. And that brings us to Masjid Sahla. So once the Imam shifts to Kufa, then the two main masjids will be his base, his capital will be in the Masjid al-Kufa, and their prayers will be held in Masjid Sahla. So Masjid Sahla and Masjid Kufa are significant. Kufa is particularly mentioned in the riwayah, as is Sahla, because it is a place that the Imam will frequent and visit. And we believe during the Ghaiba, for example, that the Imam visits also Masjid Sahla. So it has that significance from that angle as well. Yes.
So we have one. Can we take one final question?
One more question?
Okay, let's take one final question. And this might be one of a sensitive nature, Sheikh, so if it is, apologize from beforehand. But is it true that the ulama, just after the major occultation, Ghaibat al-Kubra, stopped accepting khums amounts from the believers, saying that Imam al-Mahdi did not appoint the ulama to be his representative. And this continued till the time of Sheikh al-Mufid, when he did iftihad to collect the amount of khums. So number one, is this true? And if it is, if you can please elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yes, so this was one of the things that the community had to figure out, which is what to do with the Sahmi Imam portion of the akhmas. So yes, that is correct. The evolution of how akhmas has been used and has been implemented, akhmas the plural of khums, has evolved over time. And that's not a bad thing, because intellectual exploration and understanding the needs of the community evolved over time. The needs of that time were different from the needs of today. And that's okay. But the more important thing is that khums is set aside. Now, what is done with that khums over time can evolve, providing the general categories are maintained of to whom khums is due. And that goes back to the Quran and the riwayat of Ahlul Bayt. But yes, that is correct. There was an evolution in the way khums has been allocated or rather used, and to whom it was sent and where it was sent during the occultation. Yes.
That concludes our speech and question and answer session. For the tawfiqat of Sheikh Abu Sumayya, for his long life and for the acceptance, and for the zuhur of our 12th Imam, if you can all recite a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.